Going on, friends, entrepreneurs, small business owners, and side hustlers? Today's Seven Figures Club episode brings you Mickie Kennedy, who believes that with some effort and a little money, the possibilities are endless. He is an expert at helping small businesses, authors, and startups, basically our entire community, increase their visibility and credibility. These are important services that if you don't have a strong web presence and online credibility, when someone Googles your name or your business name, you need to be paying attention to this. It's more important than ever in 2023. Mickie, by the way, founded eReleases 24 years ago. So he's been doing this over 2 decades after realizing that small businesses really needed to understand how press release services work, how they can be affordable and give you access to the media and to a national newswire. He does this all with personal touch. He holds an MFA in creative writing with an emphasis in poetry from George Mason University. His press releases have resulted in articles being published on the Wall Street Journal, one of my favorites, CNN, Bloomberg, and many more prestigious news outlets. He lives in Baltimore County with his family and 2 feuding cats, enjoys British science fiction, and acknowledges an unhealthy addiction to diet soda. Is that Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi?
Coke Zero.
Coke Zero. Good call. Yeah, I always think Coke is superior to Pepsi, so it's good to hear that you definitely agree with that, Mickie. Good to hear.
There are over 32 million businesses in the U.S., and over 90% of them will never break 7 figures in annual sales. So how do we as entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs break into that 7 figures club? This podcast will relentlessly share the secrets, strategies, and tactics I've used to create 3 multi-7 figures businesses and bring in even more successful entrepreneurs than me to share their inspirational stories and tactics to success. You can create your dream business and life right now. So buckle up and let's go.
Well, Mickie, we love to find out more about your background. You usually begin these episodes. And what was it that led you towards entrepreneurship, number one, and number two, the importance of PR releases and how effective that can be?
Right. So I graduated with an MFA in creative writing with an emphasis in poetry. I just assumed I'd be waiting tables the rest of my life and writing poetry in the evenings. And it didn't work out that way. I did a summer after graduating of waiting tables, and I realized that being on your feet 10 to 12 hours a day, concrete, was killing my ankles, my legs. And it was just exhausting, just staying on top of so many people, anticipating their needs. My mind was so on that at the end of the shifts, I was spent. I was not reading, I wasn't writing, and I realized I probably needed a safe office job. So I got a job with a telecom research startup, and I was employee number 3. And they said, you're the writer. We need you to write press releases and send them to the media. And so I did that, and I realized what the media responded to. We published a lot of data and numbers. It was, sort of like not very sexy, but behind the numbers were interesting stories. And so I would ask the other 2 people that work there who are pulling the numbers, why is one Caribbean country generating more inbound traffic from the US than all other countries combined? And they were like 1/900 numbers. And I was like, there's a story there. So I would flesh out these little interesting quirks in the telecom world using numbers, and would put together press releases. And basically I would give the genesis of what a cool story was and send it to the media. And we got picked up everywhere. Financial Times, The Economist, Washington Post, all the big publications, as well as specialty telecom trade publications. And so I saw a trend where we were doing faxing, and a lot of the journalists were asking if I could just email them going forward. And I, thought email was a natural progression. Mentioned it to my boss, and he said, hey, there could be a business there. You should explore it. And so I spent about a year when I wasn't working at the startup, because that was like 50, 60 hours a week, reaching out to journalists and asking them if I could email them press releases when I launched. And about a year later, I had 10,000 journalists, and I launched eReleases. And it's just sort of grown organically and very naturally since then. Over time, we started sending stuff over the wire through PR Newswire, and they liked that we served small businesses and entrepreneurs and people that normally they didn't serve. And I really defended the price points that they had to be a lot smaller than what they were charging, because they charged like $1,200 for a 500-word press release to go out nationally. And we were able to work it out so that our prices are still very affordable, and they're cheaper than going directly to the wire. And it's really cool because we work with these companies that normally wouldn't be able to get the access of going over the wire without spending so much more money. And it really does create a huge opportunity for leverage by being able to utilize a wire if you have a strategic message to send out.
Exactly right. And so I think some business owners may be aware of some of these services. You mentioned, PR, was it Newswire? Is that what you said?
Correct. Yep. PR Newswire is the oldest and largest newswire of press releases. There's not a lot of them anymore. There's been consolidation. So in the US, it's PR Newswire, Business Wire, or Globe Newswire. And that's it. There's a lot of other companies out there with wire in their name, but they're not real wires, set up as a wire to feed the way that the other ones do. So there is a learning curve trying to figure out the noise that's out there. But we do a really good job of educating our clients and, letting them know about the opportunities that exist with PR, because, a lot of people just assume that, getting articles written about you is very difficult, and it doesn't have to be if you have a strategic message and you're saying something in a way that the media responds to. So many of the press releases we get we have a new hire at the company, and it's not really strategic news.
Not really news, yeah.
Right. And so you might
what's a good example of something that's going to get attention, that's going to build credibility? This podcast audience is a lot of small business owners, even some startups out there, and they're looking for ways to grow. They know they need to have more of a web presence when someone Googles them online. And I know there's obviously a lot of benefit to that. So what should they be thinking about in terms of what a good news story would be that, number one, actually is going to get clicks and be interesting, and number two, is likely to rank in Google as well?
Right. So I think that anything where you're sharing your story and your journey and make it as interesting as possible. What is your story? What are the obstacles you overcame? Be vulnerable, share the warts and ugly stuff that happened as you grew. I had one client that had a really funny story about having to cancel Thanksgiving and spend the whole family in the garage putting boxes together to send out that Monday when the mail opened back up, because they had just gotten slammed with orders. And we shared that in a press release, and Inc. magazine picked it up, and that was the lead to an article about them. And the reason is these are stories that entrepreneurs can identify with, and they're things that we've been through. And so many of my clients sort of have an imposter syndrome where they feel they don't matter, and that the media wouldn't be interested in them, and that they're only interested in large companies. But the truth is, journalists don't like writing articles about Google and Microsoft. They would rather be seen as curators of small little discoveries, companies that people haven't heard of. That's why I think Kickstarter campaigns often get media coverage, just because these are like curated little finds and gems that the media sort of shares with their audience. And if you do view a journalist as a gatekeeper, where they're protecting their audience and trying to determine what they would find interesting, you can sort of reverse engineer your messaging to make it more appetizing. Like I've got a product launch. So, rather than it being all me, and a list of features, what would make a story that a journalist would want to share with its readers? Well, a use case study. Like if one of the clients who used this new product, beta tested it, and achieves, like, say, a 17% reduction in their cost as a result of it, that is more interesting than bullet points of your features. And so if you can sort of try to craft the the parts that they could build a story around, it makes it easy for them to do just that, like get a quote from that person as well and have that in the press release. Other things that work really well is I always tell people to mine your employees and colleagues within your industry. It seems like whenever you go to a trade conference, you're always talking about things that are like, are you finding that all of a sudden people that used to pay in 30 days are now taking 80, 90 days? And they'll be like, yeah. And so that's a trend in your industry that's probably happening. And if you get in front of that and issue a press release about that, you can probably get picked up in your trade publications. I had that work many times. I call it identify blind spots or gaps where trade publications aren't really reporting about things that are happening behind the scenes. And those are very effective. The biggest and most successful type of press release that I advocate is doing a survey or study within your industry, and send that out to your industry. If you don't have the contacts, there are lots of trade associations in your industry. Pick the smaller and independent ones, ideally ones that you belong to, but if not, just reach out and ask. Mention that you're doing a survey, that you're going to be doing a press release over the wire, and you'll mention them in the press release. The smaller and independent trade associations never get media coverage. So they will see this as a win-win opportunity for them to get a little bit of perhaps coverage that they normally see the large trade associations getting. So they'll share it with their members, often through email or social media. Sometimes you can get them to do both. And then you have hundreds of responses, if not more, for the survey. What were the big takeaways? What were the surprises in that survey? And then you build a press release with the most interesting results and your thoughts and analysis as to why you think it's skewed a certain way, including a quote or perhaps multiple quotes in the press release. And those are the easiest ones to get. You just want to make sure you're asking really relevant questions. What are things that are really timely right now? There's some economic uncertainty, so asking questions about your marketing spend over the next few quarters. Are you spending more or less? Have you stopped hiring? Are you still hiring? Are you dealing with hiring trends or changes, people not wanting to work in the office any longer? Those are the types of questions that, depending on your industry, could be really relevant, as well as things that are a little more specific. But taking your industry's temperature right now gives data that the media was going to find really intriguing. And I have clients that do surveys back to back, almost quarterly, and they do mix up some of the questions, but some of the questions remain the same. And just over a quarterly basis, the numbers can skew differently, and that makes interesting results as well. So generally, those result in anywhere from 6 to 14 articles, and that's a big return for doing some work, and it doesn't have to be extremely difficult. SurveyMonkey makes it very difficult, easy to get your results. It's not very difficult to build out a survey with them. I like a 4-page survey so that if someone stops midway, you've got 50% of the results, and on that last page, you can afford to ask a few wacky or left field questions that you might feel offend or are weird. And surprisingly, we have our best success with some of those strange questions. And we did one for an auto repair shop in Pennsylvania that had no web presence. Their website was tied to the Yellow Pages, and somehow, surprisingly, the Yellow Pages ended for them. And so they had a new domain name. They had no links. They weren't ranking in their area when you did a search. And so an SEO guy came to me and said, how could we get auto industry trade links? And I was like, well, a survey is going to be the only way that an auto repair shop in Pennsylvania is going to get any recognition. And they were very hesitant because they were like, we're just a little auto repair shop. And who are we to do a survey? And I'm like, you're a presence and you're doing the survey, so you're the author of the survey. And so we did it. It was the wacky question at the end where we just left an open field saying, what's the strangest thing a customer left in their car while being repaired? And we had no statistical relevance. We just compiled what we thought were the 50 most interesting responses, and they went viral. I mean, the articles and trade publications published that some of them would publish just 10 or 20, but it was very fun, and it had a virality to it. So newspapers picked it up. Their local newspaper picked it up because I had warned them that this strategy may not reach their customers, but it certainly would reach people who are looking to get out there to the media.
Yeah, no question. And so interesting stories, surveys, surprising data, something that you might be an expert on, or you can check in with customers and clients and share those interesting findings. Those are going to be very positive news stories that have the ability to go viral, to be picked up by some of these bigger publications, and a lot of benefits there. So if you have a great article, but how important is that headline? Like sometimes you might have a great article, but if you don't have a good headline, are people going to click on it? So how important, what are some of the keys to crafting the right headline so that people actually click on it and take that next step?
So the headline is the most important part of the press release. Yeah. On the wire, it's streamed by the headline. And so whether a journalist decides to click through and read the article is because of the headline. So you want the headline to be interesting and intriguing, but often, a good headline is kind of boring, but it's factual, and it really condenses and concentrates the newsworthiness or what you're announcing in a very succinct way. What you don't want to do are the New York Post pun type of headlines, because they are often intriguing, but there's no context. And so if I'm a journalist and I'm looking at my industry's feeds and I see something there that's weird, I'm not going to click on it. They're too busy for that. So you're not writing for the end user, you're writing for a busy journalist. So anything you can do to put as much information and pack it in there as possible and get that across is going to give you a better chance of getting media.
So that being the case, Mickie, are you saying that kind of a longer, more detailed headline that gives them an idea of what this is actually about is more important than kind of a short, catchy one that doesn't give very much context?
Exactly.
Wow, that is super interesting. Super interesting. I think a lot of people, common sense would have said, oh, it should be short and catchy, but no, it actually should be more detailed and relevant so that they actually know what and are justified in feeling like they're going to give their time and click on it.
It's exactly the opposite of email marketing. In my email marketing, I make my headlines short, sort of questioning, like, what's going on here? Let me click through. Right. Yeah. And it's just the opposite with the media.
That is fascinating, guys. Huge value bomb right there that Mickie just dropped for you. So make the case in terms of the benefits. You've been doing this 24 years. I've obviously used these services. They can be very powerful. How can we document some of these benefits for a small business owner whose budget is maybe a little bit limited, but they kind of know that this could be a good thing? How is this going to benefit their business and turn into more sales, especially because there's certain requirements, right? Like it can't be a sales pitch. It can't be a come over to our business, we've got a special here. It needs to be newsworthy to where a news organization wants to pick it up. And so it has to be done in the right way. But how do you do it in such a way that you're actually going to get results tangibly for your business?
Right. So when a journalist writes an article about a company, especially if it's sort of like a new company or new product, and they're sort of talking about it for the first time, it does create this, goodwill where a lot of people will then, if there's no link in the article, they'll go do a search and they'll want to do business with you. I've had clients who said this article, it only gave us like 240 visitors from the article, but what we found is like we got 120 new customers from it. And they're just like, I don't know how a landing page could work like that. And I'm like, well, it's not a landing page. There's probably a lot more people who looked at the article, but didn't come from, they didn't click beyond that. But the ones who did and were very engaged with the content wanted to do business with you based on that article. It's like an implied endorsement that happened when a journalist writes about you. They don't have to have the blinders on of, do I trust this company? Are they legit? Is this a product that I'm just going to get and be disappointed in? A lot of those barriers just disappear. And, it does convert extremely well. These customers tend to not use coupons. They generally don't price shop. They really are ideal customers, and they will remain loyal to you because they've got this relationship and this goodwill that's invested in it. Other things that you can do is you can then take that article and share it with your audience, share it with your customers, share it, more importantly, with your leads. There are a lot of people that are always in the leads pipeline who are on the fence about whether they're going to work with you. Probably 20-30% will eventually shake out and do business with you, but 70% never will. You can probably move that to 50% or better just by sharing this, because if they see that article, they click through, they read it, some of their barriers are going to fall as well, and they're going to be more likely to do business with you. And so, it's so interesting sometimes from customers that, these small little publications that pick up drive a lot of sales to them. And so it really can be effective. There's also the added benefit of getting links, SEO for your company, because these are original
Google.
Right. These are original articles, and they're not like duplicate. There is syndication that happens in press releases, but that doesn't really convey any SEO benefit. That's where the same press release appears on multiple websites. But, when a journalist writes an article about you, that's original content. Sometimes they don't link to you, but Google says they give you value as if there is a link. Google has a patent for an implied link, so that if they can contextually tell that this article is about you and your company is mentioned, that still conveys the value as if it was a link directly to your website.
So you have this article, you've made it about a story, a customer, client, something interesting, or a survey, something interesting that you find out. How specifically, because sometimes you can't even mention your company name in the article, maybe you can, but are you able to put your link down below? Are you able to put, your picture, name, bio? Like, what is it you're able to kind of put in these articles so that people actually easily could find your business?
Right. So generally in a press release, you definitely include a URL. A lot of places don't.
There we go.
Don't publish the URL. Online places generally do. But like the New York Times and Washington Post and Wall Street Journal rarely ever include a link to a website, even if they're talking about a product or a website. I have seen the exception where if you have a resource page for a survey you did, and you put all of the questions and answers there, and you build that page as a huge resource, I have seen both the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal preserve links to those. So again, that survey thing I said can be a loophole in which you can potentially or possibly get that link to your website. May not be your homepage, but it is a page to your website, and that does matter over time. And other things that you can include is up to 2 images. They could be photos, logos. I don't see the logos as being a great thing to do. I think more candid shots of your product or service. The candid ones work better. The media really does respond to multimedia because they're publishing these articles online. And if they're looking at 2 potential articles and one has images and the other one doesn't, they're going to probably use the one that does have images because they know that will enhance the article and make their visitors respond to the photo or image, and as a result they're more likely to read and drive more traffic. So do take advantage of being able to include photos. There's usually a media contact that you publish for the media, so if they have questions or anything like that, but journalists don't like to contact you, so try to include as much relevant information as possible. If you have other pages on your website that are full of data and information, for example, even a newsroom, include a link to that, and sort of about you, but make sure you have yourself really covered. A lot of people use a boilerplate towards the end of the press release, which is an about section where you sort of recycle and use that same paragraph or elevator pitch about your company, who you are and what you're about, right there at the end, that you recycle again and again. And so it gives them a really easy way to just understand who you are and what you're about.
And what about video content? Adding a YouTube embed in there and popping a video in there that really textually is connected, hopefully completely about the story that you're posting. How effective can that be?
I see a lot of people doing that, and the newswire is encouraging people to do that and charging a little bit extra for embedding that. But I'm not seeing a lot of media utilizing the content. And I think that right now,
mostly text, but an image helps, but video not so much.
Yeah, and I think it's because the media doesn't know how to use these videos. Like, can we just take this video that's on YouTube and splice it up and create our own B-roll or our own video footage? I think that
they want to keep people on the site, right? If they click away to it, then maybe. But if it's embedded, I mean, it's just right there. So I don't know.
Yeah, it hasn't been utilized as much as I thought it would be. I do think that that's where we're going. And I think we're going to see video playing a larger component. I think potentially building out stories through video is probably where we're going to be in 10 years, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, no question about it. So for, small businesses out there that are looking to grow, one of the keys, I think, to anything is consistency. How consistent should they be putting out a press release? Like you said, you don't want a press release about, oh, I just hired a new employee. That's not really newsworthy. But what is a good strategy in terms of how often to kind of push out a press release? And obviously it depends on you creating the right story or the right survey that's going to be newsworthy. But what's a good strategy there in terms of doing it regularly? Because obviously you do it once, you may or may not have the result you want. You do it over and over again, and you keep improving, and you learn from what worked, what didn't the previous time. I think your odds for a lot more success are a lot higher.
Correct. And so what we see a lot is people will do one press release, nothing happens, and then they move on and cross press releases off their list. If you are going to do press releases, you have to do a PR campaign. And generally that's 6 to 8 press releases. And you want each one to be on a specific, different topic or approach. And so, and that way you can really take a good snapshot of trying different approaches to see if your industry will respond. And ideally,
what about time frame? If you're doing 6 to 8, what time frame are you doing those in?
I work with a lot of small businesses. So for them, it's hard to do more than say 1 a quarter. So if you're doing 6, it's like a year and a half. I have some really smaller startups that are really super focused and are doing 1 a month. And so I say, pick a schedule that works for you. I know that entrepreneurs and small business owners wear a lot of hats. And so it's hard to get stuff done and be able to do it on a very regular basis. So I say, find the schedule that works for you and go forward there. I will say that I don't recommend doing like 1 or twice a year, because there is a momentum that you get. The more you're out there in the press, the easier it does get for pickup, because they'll contextually see the previous press releases when they do research on you, and it makes them, gives them more data and stuff to look at. So I do think that you lose some of that momentum when you really don't do them often enough. And that being said, stick to different types of releases that work very well. I mentioned the survey and study. I mentioned, being authentic and owning your own story. There's approaches where you can sometimes be the friendly jerk, AKA the contrarian in your industry. What people don't realize is that a lot of people do what they call, sort of newsjacking, where they join a trend that's going on in your industry. And often, there's hundreds of others joining the same trend. And so your pickup results are very unlikely to happen. But if everybody is saying one thing and you're the one person who raises your hand and sends out a release saying the opposite, you stand a very high likelihood of getting picked up in every article on the subject, because journalists want to be fair and balanced. And if you are giving a reasonable argument against something that's popular, every time they report on that popular subject is an opportunity for them to plug you in as the counterpoint to that. And, all subjects do not lend themselves to this, because you never want to take a stance that's going to alienate you with your customer base. But sometimes there are ways and things that aren't really that controversial for your industry. And an example I always use is, it seems like every article I see about electric cars is like how they're going to save the environment and they're just amazing. But if you're the contrarian, you might say, hey, not so fast. We haven't solved how we're going to dispose of these batteries and, the environmental hazards of that. The minerals that are currently used in batteries are mined in a way that's not environmentally friendly, and the labor is often done by children. And so maybe we should slow down and take a more cautioned approach and try to find alternative batteries and things like that might work in a different way. You come across as being reasonable, and yet you're saying something that no one else is sort of saying right now, and that makes it very likely for you to be plugged in.
Yeah, no question. So one of the strategies with marketing that smart marketers use is we've learned, hey, you should do an A/B test, right? You should test one version one way, another version another way, and kind of figure out which one's going to get the most results, and maybe continuously kind of do that. So how would that work? And what's kind of a case study example you think of where, hey, I'm going to do a press release this way. This is my A test. And then my next one, 2 or 3 months later, is going to be totally different B. Like, what would be kind of an example you think of where you could test, 2 different versions of a news release to see what might do better?
Right. So the example I would use, it's not a true A/B split test where you're just changing, say, the headline or something like that. But when you do a survey or study, you're trying to flesh out what 2 or 3 big aha moments were in the survey. And you may not pick the ones that are the most interesting. So you go back to the survey and you look at the questions that you didn't include in the press release, because you only picked 2 or 3 to talk about. And you pick out some other ones and say, could there be a story here? And sometimes it might be sharing the survey with colleagues and other people in your industry and say, this is what we focused on in our press release. What would, do you feel like there's something else in here based on these results? And sometimes they'll say, I think this is really interesting, that in this question, when it came to this subject, that so few people responded positively to it. And I think that given what's going on in the industry right now, insert subject matter now, that you could sort of talk about that. And so a second press release on the same survey focusing on a different question or a different series of questions is something that's been very effective. I had clients who published the resource page with all the questions and answers, and they got 3 or 4 articles written about questions that weren't even in the press release, but they were on that resource page. And obviously the journalists did the research, looked at the page, and found something that they thought was more interesting. And I always say, jump on that and try to do a press release on those, because obviously the media is responding very well to that. I think those are some of the best things to do. I think that outside of that, I think that you would be better off spent doing strategic different releases than focusing on taking the same topic and splitting it in 2 different ways, because often A/B split testing is about language and what the initial focus is on. And I think that for journalists, that's important, but I think that for them, it's, what's the news angle? And if it's the same news angle and it's just told in a different way, I think it's unlikely that that's going to be a meaningful difference. And if you're spending money to go on a wire, you just try something with a new bait or a new hook, completely new. And I think that is what I would recommend. Things that I see that work again and again for people are, top 10 list in your industry, publishing predictions. It's too late now, but annual predictions, getting them out in November and December in your industry can be really interesting. It's content that's very easy for journalists to cut and paste and just utilize. And they do have a lot of filler material where there's space to fill. And if you have a top 10 list that's really cool and has some thought to it, and analysis, then you stand the chance that that could get picked up. I say just make everything as easy for the media to digest and make it about you, but try to make it about you in a way that's makes you irresistible to the journalists and have them really want to be your advocate and share you with their audience.
Yeah, sounds good. And then what kind of length should these articles be? How many words is kind of the sweet spot that gives you kind of the best chance of that's the right length? And I'm sure when you're going through and you're putting the article in the system, it gives you some feedback. But what are we seeing these days in 2023 is kind of the sweet spot range of how many words an article should be?
I think about 500 words is usually the sweet spot. Sometimes a little less, sometimes a little bit more. But I find that if you have a boilerplate, and everything, 500 words seems like a good amount.
Gotcha. 500 words. Super impressive. Well, I think the audience at this point, Mickie, is listening, learning, and saying, all right, great. I see how this can pay dividends. This can be beneficial for my business. This can bring attention, credibility, help my search results. And they're thinking, cool, what's the next step, Mickie? How can I get this process started? Should I just write my article first? How can I connect with your team, with your program, with eReleases? Like, what's the best way to do this?
I think for anybody that's new to press releases, I have a free masterclass called about building strategic press releases. Build a campaign of press releases that work, like the survey and study one. I think that's a good place to start. It's less than an hour, but it really should give you a lot of ideas of press releases you could be doing about your company. And these are the types of press releases that are meaningful and strategic and stand a chance of getting pickup. So many people
perfect. Where's the class at?
It's at eReleases, eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. And it's completely free. And I'm hoping to get more of my customers through that training as well, because, the releases that we get are often not, earth shattering. They're not. Yeah. And so if you're going to spend money to go out over a wire, try to do it with ammo that's going to work. And I think that it's counter, because so many people almost write the press release as an afterthought. They look at someone else in their industry who wrote a press release and they sort of mirror that and make it apply to their company. And I tell you, the press release they took it from probably didn't get media pickup, and neither will they.
No question, guys. So again, guys, this is not a passive podcast. This is a podcast where we learn and take action. That's where the results come from. So you want to go to eReleases.com, pretty easy to spell, eReleases.com/plan. There's a free masterclass there where Mickie, who is the expert, 24 years of doing this, is going to instruct you. And it's probably the way you should do it. Instead of just writing it and hoping it works out, go through the class, figure out what strategically is going to get you results. And now the odds of success have increased tenfold. So that's eReleases.com/plan. And then as they're kind of doing that, going through the class, I assume it's going to give them ideas of what the right news article should be, that they should be writing.
Absolutely. It will give them the seeds for building out the types of press releases that do get media pickup routinely. It will help get you away from the noise of the types of press releases that people normally do that aren't very meaningful. And sometimes they get a little bit of pickup, but most of the time they don't.
Perfect. Well, again, you guys, that's eReleases.com/plan. A lot of value bombs. Mickie, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Are you looking for more seven-figure secrets, content, or even how you can launch your own recession-proof business? Then check out sevenfigures.com. That's the digit 7, FIGURES.com, where we share more videos, stories, strategies, funding solutions, entrepreneurial education, and even the secret business type that's recession-proof. Thank you for listening, and if you're finding value in our podcast, please give us a 5-star and invite others to join the club.